Hello, people, friends. I'm Ham. This is Rose. Why not? Let's have our guest introduce herself first. Let's put you on the
Hey
spot.
guys. Yeah, put me on the spot, huh?
Yeah, that's
Hey guys, it's True Queen of Rose. I'm the creator of the funny little Google character sheet, and Ham has invited me graciously to join in on this little presentation that they want to show you.
yeah. This is Ham. I may have accidentally forgot to credit Rose on this presentation. Uh, but rest,
It's not a huge
but no,
issue.
but rest assured, she contributed like a good amount to it, pointing out a few of my mistakes. I guess I'll start with what we're even covering with this video. Basically, we're covering all the skill bases in vanilla SotC, Stars of the City, which is a TTRPG system made by Jakafong, which is based on the Project Moon Games Library of Ruina and Limbus Company. What we're going to be going over assumes that you know how the basics of this game work already, and Jakafong has a few decent videos produced that cover that. So if you're at this point and you don't know what a module is or a skill base is or what innate modules are, I'd probably suggest you stop here and watch the base stuff first, look over the book, and then come back. But if you understand what I'm talking about, I think you should be good to understand the rest of the presentation. Anything I'm missing, Rose?
No, I think you covered just about everything
All right, sounds
I
good.
could think of.
All right, so let's talk about a few key assumptions we're doing because we're going to assume two separate things. Number one, when you're clashing with an enemy skill, you can see it and you know what it's doing. Under base rules, technically, you're supposed to see the name of the skill, but actually not know what it does. I generally don't run this rule. I've never really seen this rule be used before in more of the informal games I've been in. And so we're just going to assume that either A, we're not using the rule where you reveal a name but not what the actual dice are, or that, if you're using those rules, that it's at a point where you already see the move once and it's later scenes, and therefore you can know what's going on. The second one is the ability to target with all skills. TLDR, there's in the main book, there's technically a rule that says if your skill doesn't have offensive dice, you can't target aggressively with it. As in, you can't target an enemy, they declare a response, and then you declare something that either has no dice or only has defensive dice. This causes lots of really weird interactions. For instance, I've targeted this enemy, they're responding back, and I want to deploy a defensive dice skill in response to that, but oh no, I suddenly can't because I was the one that targeted, which encourages you to hold all your dice. And so we're going to assume that this is not the case, and we're going to treat all the skills the same in that regard. And also the reason why we're going to assume this is because a lot of the campaigns I played in and have experience playing in try and imitate both Ruina and Limbus rules, the games it was drawn from. And in those games, you can target with whatever you want. Rose, any more comments on this or?
No, I don't think I have anything I could
All right,
add.
all right, got it. Then let's keep on going right now. So let's talk about the fundamental rules of dice interactions and generally what you should be kind of paying attention to in this regard. So you're going to notice that offensive dice, if it wins, it does its full effect general. And if it loses, it does nothing. This is very all or nothing. So what we're going to call an interaction where you are using a bigger offensive die against an opponent's smaller offensive die, we're going to call it forcing, because essentially you're forcing your way past their smaller dice and taking all the rewards. This is generally the most favorable interaction you can get in this system, if you can get it. Next, block dice. Clash win, you will notice that the stagger it deals is still reduced by the opposing die's power, even if it loses, as opposed to offensive dice, which are not reduced inherently. So I call this absorption because if you notice, on Clash Lose, it still reduces damage in Stacker. Either way, defensives does something, and it's also modulated by the opposite die power in such a way that even if you win, you're not winning a lot, and if you're losing, you're not losing a lot either. So I call this neutralization. Now for evades, one of the big things that it notably does is if it clash wins versus an offensive dice, it reuses itself. So it's basically as if the offensive die did not exist at all. I call this absorption because basically the defensive die absorb the offensive die, and only evades can do this. Anything to add, Rose?
Um, no, I don't think
Yeah,
so.
so and here we have like a small table that pretty much demonstrates this. And I must reiterate, offensive versus offensive clashes are winner take all. If you win an offensive die clash, you get everything, they get nothing. And so vice versa if you lose one. Whereas if there's any defensive dice involved at all during the clash, it changes the dynamic heavily, save for exception with evades. And so here is a general like graphic representation of these things I was discussing. As we see, the offensive dice generally gets all its value off, but in neutralization, even if it loses, this portion of damage and stacker is reduced. Similarly, defensive into defensive, either way you put it, it just neutralizes. Same thing over here. Um, and we're talking about absorption over here. Again, this bar does not get grayed out because all of an evade's value is retained after winning against an offensive dice because it is reused. But it can also get forced over because notably, if an evade loses against an offensive dice, damage is not reduced. So basically, this portion of the offensive dice, you still get the damage value, which is actually a very huge thing. So forcing over evades is very real. Of course, you're still reducing the stagger, which is very notable, but it's not as good as neutralizing with a block dice. Here we see again an evade into any defensive, because it's not an offensive, neutralizes. And even if it loses, still neutralizes, more or less the same. Any comment, Rose? No.
Not quite yet. I think I
Yeah.
think I will very soon though.
Here we
Yep,
yeah.
right here.
Right. Yeah.
All right. So one thing that Ham invited me on to discuss is just some of my own general thoughts, especially around absorption or evade dice. Um, I wanted to talk a little bit about the pros and cons versus, deciding to use absorption and neutralization as like some of your main strategies. I'm going to start with absorption because it's what I personally prefer. The pros to it is that it actually gains value on wins compared to neutralization. And what I mean by that is that whenever you win with a block dice in the system, it has roughly equal value as to whenever it ties. Obviously, you deal a little bit of stagger to your opponent. However, absorption has a much larger value in this case because it is reused. So it is effectively acting as an entirely second die for free, which is insane value. Another reason that I really prefer like absorption evade dice is that they are very flexible. Because they reuse, they inherently have a sort of shape altering effect. And this shape altering effect allows for them to be used against a larger number of skills, even skills which have defensive dice in the mix up. In addition, it also punishes repeated uses of like smaller offensive dice. So skills that like to one side are usually, for example, these kinds of skills, and you can punish them really hard with any sort of evade. Some of the cons, however, they are riskier. Uh, its best value is exclusively on wins, as on a tie, it is equal to neutralization, and you would have preferred to have had neutralization there. Um,
Yeah.
it also, on losses, it has a lower value because neutralization decreases both, as Ham mentioned before, it decreases both HP and stagger, whereas absorption only decreases stagger. Some people might see this as less of a downside than it could be. It depends on how much you value HP versus stagger, but I value both pretty equally.
Yeah. I'll like
And
that. I
sorry.
am definitely one of those people that values stagger more than HP. But even then, like punishing repeated offensive dice, as Rose points out, like is such a major thing because so many enemies just have that. Like it's that's a very good point that she raises. Sorry, continue. Continue. Yeah.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
I
Like
appreciate you adding that in.
yeah.
Um, the final con to absorption actually relates to a sort of pro that neutralization has, in that neutralization removes the win value of absorption in clashes, meaning that any situation in which absorption is versus neutralization, or evades are versus blocks, you lose out on any of the potential extra value that you could have had. So, in any situation where you're going up against a block dice, it should be generally better if you're playing defensively to have a block dice in that place instead.
I mean,
On to neutralization. Sorry.
sorry. Yeah. I mean, I will add that like it is actually decently good to have evade into block because you're regenning your stagger. Sometimes it's better to do stagger damage, sometimes it's better to regen, but like that's not really like as much of a con as it might seem at first. Like evades into defensives generally perform just as well as blocks, like on a broad scale. Sorry, continue. Yeah.
Oh, no, I missed that. Thank you for catching
Yeah.
that. I still think one of the biggest points to absorption is still loss, but yes, that is something to consider
Oh
that
yeah.
you do get stagger back. As for neutralization, neutralization has pretty good value on loss. That's one of the pros for it. Obviously, because it reduces all of the incoming offense, HP and stagger. It's very good in the use case where all you want is to minimize damage, and you don't really care about being hit, which is a very big distinction that I will probably get into some other time. Oh,
Whoops. Sorry. A slight
it's
blooper
okay.
here. Yeah.
Also, to note, neutralization is less risky than absorption because at least tying produces most of the value that you would want from a die of neutralization. Um, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. A tie with a block die
Mhm, yeah.
is it basically has the same value as an absorption die, and in that same spot, but it has the better, loss condition. Now, as for cons, it gains less value on wins compared to absorptions. It obviously has the stagger damage, as mentioned before, but it just the value from being able to absorb multiple dice is just it cannot be overstated how strong that can be. And you will definitely be seeing that much later in the presentation. Also, the use cases for neutralization can be lower because the die itself can't really change position, so to speak. It can't create more of itself, so it has a stricter amount of use cases. Um, so I think that's the most of what I wanted to say here. Do you have any final thoughts, Sam?
Uh, yeah. I will say that like evades are such powerful tools. Like I don't think like it's possible to get across no matter what we say, like in practice, how like much value an evade that rolls like even moderately well gets over a block die. I will also say that block dice are super important. For instance, in my campaign, Moonlit Waltz, where I have lots of tougher enemies, block dice have been pretty much their lifeline because they just cannot afford to take that much HP damage. So it's definitely like one of those cases where it varies a lot by campaign. And but if like the enemy encounters aren't too tough, evades are just so much better. Like it's not even funny. Yeah, I mean that's all I have to add. All right, all right. If that's all we have to say, on to rolls, right? You good?
I'm good.
All
Yeah.
right. All right. So when we're talking about skill bases, I'm gonna put a list of roles for them, and what that's going to generally entail is it's generally what this specific thing will do. Um, so going through them, I'll explain. One-siding. There's some bases that just like don't clash well. Like if it goes into another skill, either you're going to get hit very badly, it's going to get eaten, or you're just not going to get the full value of it. And so you're just better hitting someone who can't fight back. And generally, a pattern with these types of skills for one-siding is that you get much better bang out of your buck by one-siding than other types of skills. There's another type of one-siding where it's a skill with both offensive and defensive dice, and you're saving the defensive dice by one-siding someone in order to prevent yourself from getting attacked more later on. So like skills that cannot clash and skills that where you want to save a defensive dice potentially are those two types of one-siding. And we're kind of lumping them into one because you use them in generally the same situations. On use and after use carriers. So lots of skills can carry on use and after use effects. Lots of them are such as gain this boon, gain this buff, like gain strength, gain safeguard, gain name a boon, Rose, any boon. Aggro? Sure, yeah, aggro. And so essentially, these, because of their light value specifically, are very good for on use and after use carrier due to quirks that I will discuss later on as we get into the actual bases. Finally, status infliction. These are bases that, by virtue of their shape and dice composition, are really good at inflicting statuses. And it's slightly different from one-siding because while every single one-siding base that is primarily offensive dice is good for status infliction, not all things that are good at status infliction are one-siding skills because some of them are actually like somewhat decent-ish at clashing if you do them right. And so these are just the basic rules. Next, clashing. This is a huge one. If it's not a one-siding skill, generally it can be a clashing skill. And there's some skills that are good at both clashing and one-siding, such as the ones with offensive and defensive dice as mentioned. So the roles are going to be as mentioned as before. It's going to be forcing, delayed forcing, neutralization, delayed neutralization, and absorption. So this is what the shapes of all of them look like. First of all, you're going to know something. The bars for the ones with two dice are lower than the ones with one die. This is because the bases that are one dice typically just have a greater maximum at the same light cost. And this is very relevant because very often you don't want to be trading down light. Like if your enemy is using a 2 light skill, you do not want to be using a 3 light skill because if you have to use a 3 light skill to answer a 2 light skill, you slowly rack up this light debt until you eventually lose. And if you want to look at this, this is the rough relationship between all of these ones on the left. Forcing, delayed forcing, neutralization, and forcing. The reason why absorption and multi-die are not on this chart will be discussed in the next slide. But for now, we'll just focus on these because these are really the ones that matter in terms of clashing and that you actually have to think about. So delayed forcing is definitely one of the stronger ones out here, as you notice. Delayed forcing beats forcing because generally what happens with delayed forcing against forcing is this big offensive die gets partially eaten by this defensive dice and then it hits back with the full offensive. And because on average multi-die bases have greater numbers when combined than single dice bases, delayed forcing beats forcing just by trading up. Similarly, delayed forcing beats neutralization because just like forcing into delayed forcing's first defensive die does not get as much value, neutralization into delayed forcing's first die gets even less value. And so this is a very big blowout. As you notice, these arrows are green. This third green arrow is indicating how it matches up into its own base if it costs more light and thus has generally higher numbers. This, if you notice, is green purely because there's an offensive die here. Because what happens is the first die neutralizes and then it forces into itself. Like for instance, if this had more light, the bar would be up here, and of course it would win. And then because the winner take all nature of offensive dice versus offensive dice clashes, it would get much more value out. Similarly, you're going to see forcing is also green into itself because again, you have a big chungus over here. You put it against a bigger chungus, and it will most likely lose, get no value, while the opposing dice gets all the value. Notably here, neutralization is yellow into forcing. Now, what does that mean? That means it's generally okay to play into there because if it wins, it's not getting too much value. If it's losing, it's not getting too much value. It's generally okay. This is because, again, this is a defensive dice. It neutralizes into forcing. And win or lose, if it's a block die, it does not gain that much value. Over here, we have delayed neutralization, which, exactly what it sounds like, is good into delayed forcing because you're neutralizing the second die. This is just generally for if you're feeling cautious. Notably, you're going to see that I'm saying that delayed neutralization into neutralization is kind of favored, as indicated by this arrow. Now, why is that? It's because like winning this against this, yes, you either regen a lot of stagger if this is an evade, or you do some stagger damage if this is not an evade and it's a block. But either way, delayed neutralization, you save this second defensive dice. And this second defensive dice can be used as a neutralizer against, say, forcing. Or it can like take care of this defensive dice over here and make sure that guy doesn't save that if it's traded into here. And so, again, you're going to see that like you're going to get this save defensive die out of it, and the only price you pay is giving some stagger or taking some stagger, which really isn't such a huge thing. Similarly, these are like yellow into themselves because they're all defensive dice. Win or lose, doesn't really matter. You're just going to trade some stagger here. And again, delayed neutralization into forcing is yellow because the kind of rough thing here is a good amount of this is still getting through no matter how much you structure it. And it's still okay because you get the save defensive dice. Now, on to like why I'm not including absorption and multi-die inside this general circle. Put bluntly, multi-die sucks at clashing very, very badly. It's the point where all of these listed generally make it into clashing uses, but multi-die are generally relegated one-sided. So here's the reason why. So I have constructed multi-die into every single archetype, including itself. You're going to find that there's basically only one case in which you actually want to clash using a multi-die. So absorption eats multi-die. As mentioned by Rose, you can use one evade die to eat arbitrarily large amounts of offensive dice. And if you use a single large evade, what happens is that because the dice values of multi-dice skills that are all offensive in this system are on average so low, at equal light cost, evades just eat all the multi-die, and it's a complete blowout. From now on, when I say multi-die, I won't be referring to like delayed forcing or delayed neutralization. When I say multi-die, it means all offensive dice, generally. Now, multi-die into delayed forcing, well, offensive into defensive is kind of neutral, and then offensive into offensive is a coin toss. Yes, in theory, what happens here is the first one doesn't matter, and you can win the second one, but it's extremely risky, and you're basically 50-50 with the enemy. into delayed neutralization, multi-die, again, goes neutral. It's not great. Multi-die into neutralization is somewhat okayish, but the main issue with that is this large green patch, blue patch, is indicating either A, you're taking a massive amount of stagger damage, or two, you're going to give your enemy a large amount of stagger. Wait, actually, no, sorry, I made a mistake. Or this is an evade and it gets eaten. So you're either taking a ton of stagger, or you're multi-axing eaten. So either way, this isn't great. Yes, you're trading generally up. However, there's so much better things you can be doing into neutralization, such as delayed forcing, or you could save an evade die. And these things at the same light cost are just so much better than a multi-die. Multi-die into forcing is really, really rough. This is like one of the worst things about multi-die because the prevalence of offensive dice on opponent sheets. Like enemy sheets, I want to say a vast majority of them have a skill that's just one big die. And if you multi-die into that, because of, again, all or nothing nature of offensive dice, you're trading like this, and they're getting more value than you. And then the other thing is, if you're trading a multi-die into a bigger multi-die, their bigger multi-die wins. Yes, you can use this to trade your big multi-die into smaller multi-die. And that's about the only case you ever wanted to use your multi-die, is into a smaller multi-die. And so what we're kind of left with is this dice structure, multi-die, that doesn't trade well into anything except itself, and especially gets blown out by absorption. Which leads to just like, there's very rare cases where you actually ever want to use this. Which is why it's not on this table, because it's more or less trivial if your enemy's using it, and if you're using it, there's two use cases. You're either hitting them one-sided, or you're using a bigger one against a smaller one. The other reason is absorption. Absorption against a multi-die just eats it all. And again, this kind of singular issue here is that because absorption into multi-die is so trivial, and multi-die is not in this table, absorption acts as a worse neutralization into any actually tough to clash enemy skill in general. And so basically, you're just going to treat absorption as neutralization. You can substitute in over here, and it more or less behaves the exact same way, which is why there's no need to include both of these in the table. All right, before we move on,
I would like to mention something else actually, if
yeah,
I
go ahead.
can. One thing also to note about absorption or evade dice in general is that it's actually quite hard to get a single evade die at high light cost because there is no skill base above 2 cost that just has a singular evade dice. There is one that has a very big one, but I think that's even an extra point against multi-die because that one base would evade everything and then punish you for even trying to clash with a multi-die. Multi-die against any sort of evade is absolutely horrid.
Which is like, which I will take time to mention. Just like in case there's some rulebook misinterpretations. If you are following the rules inside the current 0.5 version or 0.4 version of Stars of the City, the enemy always has to show their skill before you do. So when we're talking about this multi-die being really horrible in a clash, what we mean is like, if you have a multi-die on your skill list and you see what the enemy's doing beforehand, there's almost always just a better option to literally anything they're doing that is not a multi-die if you constructed your skill base efficiently. And so we're not saying you can't clash with a multi-die. For example, like yellow's not horrible. These are good use cases, and you have a bigger multi-die, great, that somewhat works. But also, number one, this is fairly obvious, whereas these need a bit more thought. And number two, generally, you have a better answer, and if you have a better answer, why not just do that instead of the multi-die? And that also goes for a lot of these roles. We're going to see for the next spaces, which really segues into ratings. Roles, ratings, both of them are under this context of there is something better. It's never really that you cannot use this well. It's there's no reason for you to use this when there is a better version available. And I think that's going to be abundant as I explain the rating system. So I must emphasize this as much as I can. This is not a tier list. This is a rating of generally how I find uses for these bases inside of my skill lists. Very often, if like these niche and catch case, which are quote unquote lower than staple, are a tiny bit more efficient in answering enemy skills, and I want to use them more in clashes. This is more rating generally where you want to be taking these, how you want to be thinking of these, and where you want to be pulling from in spots. For example, staples. Staples generally are identified by like you can just stick them wherever you want without too much thought, and it works because they're generally versatile and good enough at their jobs, and the things that they're versatile slash good at are good enough slash common enough that you want them. And again, this is like very DM dependent, and what I'm basing this off is based both my experience, my enemy design experience, and looking at the basebook enemies. Now, catch cases, this is a bit weirder. This is more, I have a specific reason I want to put this here. Maybe like my build is weak to, let's just take multi-die, right? I don't have a good answer to multi-die, so I'm going to take like an absorption, right? That's an example of a catch case usage. That is not to say that the absorption ones are catch cases. In fact, I put them as staples because they're very often useful in other cases, but catch cases are often used with this kind of thinking of like, there's this hole inside my build that I need to fill. I'm going to reach for a catch case if a staple can't do it. Niche is more iffy in the sense that niche skills very often need entire builds to be warped around them because they are useful in very specific cases. Some of these skills are pretty good to the point where it's pretty, I want to say, good to center a build around them because in the cases they're good enough to warrant the trouble. I would personally recommend if you want to use a niche skill base, one of them really jumps out at you, that you select it early. Because what happens when you select a niche skill base is you want to build the rest of the build around it to compensate for its weaknesses in order to fully utilize its strengths. Questionable ones, these are the ones where either there's another one that's straight up better in the vast majority of cases, or two, yes, there's a use case, a very specific use case, but it like comes up once every fight, or even less, depending on design. And it's just really tough to justify recommending this base. Again, you can use any skill base well if you really try. Questionable ones are generally you're not going to get a lot out of trying to make it good. Anything to add here? Or
I think you covered it quite thoroughly.
all right, good. You see, the way thing is like Rose here is my sanity checker, just to make sure like I'm not missing something major. It's quite.
And I'm here to add my own little thoughts.
Yeah,
now and
100%.
then.
That too. And for instance, neutralization, I completely forgot about that until she reminded me. I'm very grateful to her for that.
You mean absorption?
Absorption. Yeah. See, you add things and you correct me when I'm being dumb. Excellent. Anyways, let's get into the actual skill bases. All right. These are all single offensive dice. They're called this because they're single offensive dice. I call them inside my fundamentals document, which is my write-up on just the fundamental dynamics of the system, as singular strike. But for this, we're going to call it single offensive dice in general. So for singular offensive dice over here, you're going to notice lots of these are pretty highly rated. There's 2 staples and then 2 catch cases. The weird thing here is if you're looking strictly at the numbers, right, you're getting 4 expected value, which is this little number over here. Now, what does this really mean? This is the average average result you're going to get out of this sum over here. For instance, 1d8 plus 3, this 1d8 on average is 4.5 in value, and this is 3 in value. So 4.5 plus 3 is 7.5. So I'm using these numbers over here to get a general gauge of how much quote unquote output you're getting out of this dice. So you're going to see the jump from 3.5 to 7.5 is 4. And then 7.5 to 10.5 is 3, and then 10.5 to 14.5 is 4. So logically speaking, if you're getting more like quote unquote bang for your buck light wise on your 1 cost and 3 cost, why am I rating these catch case? This is another one of those things where from experience and like context in this system, changes things rather drastically. You're gonna notice that this is an on use and after use carrier, and this isn't. The reason why is there are so many modules in this system that have the clause where if it's put on a 0 cost, it treats the cost as 1, which means you get worse scaling on the on use and after uses versus a single strike because they're the same, while this is 0 light and this actually costs light. And you're going to see this especially come into effect when you're playing at 2 or 3 speed dice, purely because 2 string singular strikes is 2 light. 2 cheap blows is 0 light. Having a very good 0 light when you're playing at 2 or more speed dice is so essential, which is why this is a staple. Again, we're going to look at these uses over here. These are both one-siding. This is because, like, as we're going to see on the next slide, they just don't have high enough numbers to consistently clash against most enemies. I say consistently. They still can, but it's not consistent, which means there's a chance that you get bodied. And my personal playstyle, which definitely is leaking into this presentation, is to take very little unnecessary risks. Now, we're going to look at Strong Strike now. You're going to notice how this jumps back to stable. This is because 2 light is a very, very good light cost. A lot of modules can only be put on skills with 2 light cost or more. And so this is like the first demarcation point where you can put a lot of the stronger modules, like Berserker in this current iteration of the system. This might change in the future. If you're watching this in a future version and this changed, well, I'm sorry, I can't really anticipate future content. But in general, the models you get are much better. And then, again, on use, after use, they actually start scaling at this point. So if a cheap low, say, has preventative measures, which is a module that get on use gives safeguard, cheap low gets you 1. Single strike gets you 1. Strong strike gets you 2, which is actually a notable jump, which is why it's a good on use / after use carrier. And again, forcing, I want to just mention, strong strike is abnormally good at clashing. I basically take this based on almost every character I have, and I use it very often, at least for like 1/3 of all my turns. It's just that good against traditionally designed enemies. Now, on a massive strike, drops back to catch base. Why is this? Simply put, 2 to 3 is a massive jump in light cost in practice, and it's really hard to explain why unless you've actually played the game yourself. At 1 light a speed die especially, strong strike is 2 cost. You regen generally 1 light at 1 speed dice, as in before your first major improvement. And so you're going down 1 light every single turn. So that's -1 every turn. You can spam it about the amount of light you have -1. So you have 5 light, you can spam this 4 times. Whereas with Massive Strike, you're paying 3 and you're regenerating 1, which means you're going -2 every turn. And you're seeing this where this, despite only being +1, if you're looking at net light at 1 speed die, this actually costs twice as much per turn while only getting +4. And again, 3, it's a breakpoint for several really important modules, like Assist Attack, which is a really great module. It's at 3. But it just isn't worth the extra light cost a vast majority of times. And as we're going to see in the future slides, Strong Strike is just good enough most of the time. Any testimonials to add, Rose, about these bases from your experience?
I would say, at least personally for me, I really like Massive Strike in a lot of the cases where it is used. not for particular numbers reasons, but for more like context sensitive reasons, especially with things like status effects and tremor. But I think it's like a little bit outside of the. I think it's a little bit outside of the purview of what's like being discussed exactly here.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely like it has better
but
scaling. Yeah, that much I
yeah,
agree.
but I will say, Massive Strike. I would say one of its catch cases is definitely on an already weakened opponent, where you can easily kind of beat them down and stagger them in a situation like that. And being able to do so more consistently, even at the cost of higher light, is still good because you then have that next turn to kind of recover or dish out some smaller blows uh, for free. So there's a good reason why you might use Massive Strike to be able to break through an opponent.
Yeah, I think this goes into like our different perspectives because very often when looking at staggered opponent or like a weakened opponent, I want to use strong strike even if they stay up purely because light economy reasons. Because I generally like to have precautions in case another enemy jumps in or I roll low and just controlling for the worst case like that. Speaking of staggered opponents, cheap low is really great to use just to wail on them when they're staggered by either a massive strike or a strong strike or a multi die or literally anything, because you're paying 0 light to just get extra damage on them, and you use that turn as like a light regen, which is very good. That's also why on lots of my builds, I really like putting my 0 cost as cheap low, because it's generally more useful than the other 0 cost in more situations. I think we're ready to move on to the clashing bros.
Yep.
All right. All right. So here we have a pretty standard module setup for this. Powerful potential increases dice size and gives it a +1. And I put ongoing struggle on this. Now we're gonna see sometimes I'm gonna put a normal check on these, and sometimes I'm gonna put ongoing struggle. There's very specific reasons for it that for this one I'm going to elaborate on. When this case changes, I'll elaborate on why. It's just a lot of factors that determine whether you're better off putting ongoing struggle onto a die or any check. So this is what I want to say the stock standard cheap low is. I'm omitting any on use tags purely because they're not relevant to clashing too much and they're guild dependent, and I want to just leave this for you guys to fill in. But pure clashing wise, this setup is very good. It gets you a 1d8 plus 3, which gets you 7.5 expected value. This is really good. One-sided, it is very good damage. Clashing, it sometimes can work. We're going to run into why I personally think that these two aren't really great in Clash, because by example, so I'm generally taking the relatively tough enemies slash average enemies to try and demonstrate clashes against. My philosophy is you should be able to win or at least go neutral with high certainty at equal light cost against enemies. And so over here we're going to see cheap low into single edge. You're with the check, you're looking at a 1d8 plus 3 into 1d6 plus 2, which means you have on average 2 expected value over this. This looks good until you realize that if you just happen to roll low, like not even super low, like a 3, for instance, 3 plus 3 is a 6. And then if this guy rolls a 4, it's going to clash tie. If he rolls a 5, that's going to clash win. Rolls a 6, it's a clash win. Which means if you get very slightly unlucky, like 3 is like a relatively average roll, all of a sudden, this has a half chance of winning or tying. And this is what I mean by it's not very consistent. I would not trust a cheap blow into single edge. Now, single strike, I would in this case, because it's a +6 instead of a +3, and it's a D10, which there's less chance to whiff with. And even if it's a 1, that's still a 7 roll, and this would have to max roll to even beat it. But again, note how I have to go to higher light cost over here. This is not what I consider like a super good exchange, purely because I'm going down light. Another note, you're gonna notice I put check +2 power condition and put normal check here. This is kind of assuming that you have a condition you can fulfill in basebook. Right now in point 5, there's struggle, there's a bunch of ailment exploits, and all of them give you cost plus 1 power for a condition. The reason I'm not putting ongoing struggle here is because of the ramp up time. Over here, if I put a normal check here, it would be plus 1 power if the condition's fulfilled, which means after round 1 and go to round 2, this is the same value as a normal check, and after round 2, it's better value. Which means there's almost never a case where you don't want to just put ongoing struggle here. Over here, though, it takes 3 rounds for this to ramp up to power, and if there was a ongoing struggle here, it would take 2 rounds for it to ramp up. And the first 2 rounds having slightly less power is slightly rough, and this is assuming that you have a way to consistently get your power condition when it matters. And so in this case, I do prefer a normal check, though of course, ongoing struggle on a 1 cost still isn't bad. Now, notably, I'm going to look at this 1 cost in Clash versus a bunch of other 1 costs. Predictive Slash, you kind of just get neutralized by this evade. Yes, you do damage, but it hits back with a hit effect. And this is a rough Clash. I would not take this. Similarly over here, this is kind of alright. You hit with a 11.5 versus a 5.5 if it's at 2 plus insight. We're assuming this. And sure, you get your hit tag, you get whatever else you want over here, and you get 2 sinking, and you get 5.5 damage on average. This is, again, pretty rough. You're going to note here, sinking. Sinking just has a rough effect on EP. It was recently updated in the 0.5 version to be less brutal, but still, this is not a favorable trade. I would not voluntarily choose this if I had another option. And into itself, again, we're going to see that 9.5 into 8.5 is not super reliable. With the check, it's a tiny bit better. But still, again, I would probably choose to do something else rather than Clash single strike into Clash high kick. Especially if, for some reason, you don't have the power condition going on. This suddenly becomes a really rough Clash where you just can randomly lose and take 13 damage and get 3 burn on you. Again, this isn't great. This is why I'm classifying these as one-sided. Any comment, Rose?
Nope.
Yep.
Don't think I have anything I can particularly
More or less
say.
agree with it?
Yeah.
All right. Now, let's discuss Strong Strike and Massive Strike. This is why I consider these very good at forcing. So, the worst case, somewhat, is you're doing this into a multi-die, somewhat ironically. On player side, multi-die isn't great because you have a better option. On enemy side, multi-die is slightly annoying, especially if you're trying to clash single strikes into them. But the reason I'm putting this multi-die here is you're going to see, even if you're doing it in a kind of honestly bad case, you are still trading 15.5 damage with the conditional versus 8 damage. That's nearly twice the damage. Now, you're going to notice this is like a pretty big jump. This is because cost not only means that your base is higher, it means your checks scale higher. And again, we're going to see I'm choosing a normal check here instead of ongoing struggle because it takes time to ramp up to +4 and rather just take this conditional power because I have faith in my build generally to be able to achieve that. Massive Strike similarly has this scaling condition where, again, this is +3, +4. The cost is scaling the check, which means the cost plus the base has a compounding effect on the power. Now we're going to look at the really big dice. I could not find a good 3-cost big dice skill on an enemy within the base book for the life of me. Maybe it will be updated in the future, or maybe I'm blind, but the best I could find is amputation over here. You're going to see, again, this 11.5 without the check, it's rough, but with the check, 15.5 into like 11.5, players have a massive advantage generally at higher cost forcing, purely because enemies typically do not have very good checks on them, and player checks scale. And so this 15.5, if you have the check versus 11.5, is near guaranteed to win. And if it wins, you're doing a massive amount of damage while at even light. This is very good. And again, another aspect of this is a lot of the higher cost skills, people tend to want to add more dice rather than make a single dice larger. And so what happens here is if you're clashing into this, again, notably, I'm taking this on use effect into account and assuming that this person has 50 missing health. They have 150 missing health, so this is going to be at 9.5. This can, in theory, go up to 11.5. But again, you're going to see that this just beats it. And this block, because it's unopposed, just kind of doesn't do anything. And so you traded 2 cost into 3 cost favorably, which means you came out on light and came out on effects. And in contrast, you see how this is so much better than the 0 and 1 cost versions of this? This is what I mean by you have better options. And again, Massive Strike does a similar thing. It definitely does. It can win here, but you're no longer trading ahead on light, which means if the enemy has equal light economy, as in they regen the same light as you, if you keep on trading like this, you run the risk of running dry first, or you just slowly bleed out light because you're forced to use a 3 cost against it to answer a 2 cost. Which, again, is not necessarily the case because you can use other skills to cover this. And again, same deal here. Massive Strike into Illuminate, in theory, isn't that good. In practice, is actually pretty decent. Yeah, that's about it for this slide. Any comments before we move on?
Yeah, I actually wanted to mention. I'm glad you did mention the Massive Strike actually going into Illuminate Thy Vacuity. Because in a situation like that, where there's a whole bunch of weaker dice, you're more likely than not going to hit with almost the full power of your offensive die, and that could even stagger the target, which renders the rest of the skill null. And in a situation where you're clashing against a weakened target, I think particularly these single die bases work really nicely.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like, I cannot count the amount of times in a campaign where I just pulled out my strong strike and it dealt like 22 damage because some other modules like Berserker and Bonus Doubler, which may or may not be in the system by the time you're watching this video, which is why we're not mentioning them. Yeah, in general, Strong Strike, very good. Massive Strike, I'm not as hot as it on it as Rose is, but also that's only because I like Strong Strike so much. Like, that's not because Massive Strike is bad. It's not bad by any means. I just think Strong Strike is better. Um, but they're both very good bases. I wholeheartedly recommend you sticking Strong Strike in basically any build at all, and it will perform wonderfully. You will find a place to use it. It will do big damages. It will be cinematic because it's like one big blow. Like, narratively also, these are very cool to flavor, like speaking from a role playing perspective, because it's one big hit. You can have them like aura farm, you can have them like sheath their sword and draw it. You can have fun with these. Yeah,
Have them do a silly little one-liner,
exactly. Like,
like a Fire Emblem crit quote, Pick a god and pray.
anyways, yeah, no, that's very fair. But yeah, that's the deal there. That's the single these. You're gonna notice that the ratings for these are all over the place. Okay, so Dual Strike is somewhat okay. It's the only way you get 2 dice on 1 cost, which why it's a catch case. Because just in case you just like status infliction on a 1 cost. For example, for burning these each do 2 burns. It's not like horrible. I don't think it's great. I'd rather have quick jabs, which I'll discuss later. But this is not a horrible base. Fake out. Again, it's a catch case because what you can do with this is you can put a clash lose. The last die gains 2 power, which is comeback, a rank 1 module that hopefully is still in the system by the time you're watching this. And this becomes a 7.5 average, and that's somewhat okay if you squint at it very hard. I'm trying to make this work. But yeah, this is like somewhat okay-ish. Double attack I rate as questionable simply because the way that the power is distributed it's even on both ones, and just 1d8s aren't very good at 2 cost at beating anything. It's just really rough, which is why this is questionable. This, because it has a +1, is slightly better. I still would not like use this. In retrospect, like this can go into niche as well. But the other thing is, this is good at stats infliction because you just like put 2 on hit tags on there, and this like does 6 burn. And so as a really shitty clasher that also can like do a ton of status, this is fine. The reason why like it's a catch case is because when making my kits, tend to like discrete, efficient skills. And for that, quick jabs is, in my opinion, unquestionably the best status inflicting base in this entire system, including unique skills. It's because it's a 2 cost with 3 dice. So what that means is for burning, which scales at cost +1, this is 9 burn, which is really nuts. These dice sizes over here, they do not matter at all. What matters is that there's 3 dice and they scale with cost over here. And so that's pretty self-explanatory. But again, this can't clash for shit, like this one over here. And full assault, the reason why this is questionable is just from experience and just from a numbers perspective, guess you're gaining some amount of power, but against 3 or 2 cost skills, you're kind of joking with yourself if you think that you can consistently win against tougher skills to clash. And even into like quick jabs, this is not consistent, assuming that enemies have roughly the same base values as you. And so that's why this is questionable. I know that you have some opinions here, if I recall last time I checked, especially like with quick jabs. Do you want to chime in with them? Sorry.
Absolutely. I will say I don't disagree with you on quick jabs probably being a more efficient option. However, I personally am a big fan of full assault because having that extra bit of cost is pretty massive for a lot of status effects, especially the ones that have themselves. Because, as Ham said, it's cost +1 for a lot of these infliction modules. That inflicts 12 versus 9, assuming that you manage to get all of it off.
Yeah.
But it also means that like each individual die does slightly more. But I wanted to mention quick jabs only being able to do 9. It lasts for I think 4 scenes because it's like it goes from 9 to 4 to 2 to 1.
Yeah.
Whereas with 12, it goes from 12 to 6 to 3 to 2 to 1.
And then
So
6 is
you
the
get a
threshold.
whole extra scene of that burn existing. If you for some reason cannot get off more burn, and it also when it comes to
Checks,
I feel like personally for me when it checks is another thing to consider.
Yeah,
That is a
because
very
like
big thing. Yeah.
if I may interject, very often the amount like it's checking for in this current version for sinking and burning is 6, which means full assault hits 12 and once half is 6, which means you can trigger the check next round. Whereas quick jabs is 9 and it halves to 4, you don't get the check. And so that is one notable thing. Just from my perspective though, again, it's a thing where like 2 cost is so much better than 3 cost as a light value that I'm okay taking that downside. Um,
Yep. At the end of the day, it's always about what your particular build is going for and what you want as a player. You know,
yeah, and like
all of this stuff is very, very general.
exactly, and we're just here not to tell you what to do, but tell you like how, in our experience, how using these bases works and ways we've made them work and ways you can do them. And generally, it's your job to really interpret it and figure out, how do I want to use this knowledge? This is more a framework for understanding this, and you might even like disagree with some of the ratings because these are subjective, but what is relatively objective is these are the numbers in this current version of this system. These are where the bases stand right now, and you have to figure out like how to finagle these. Like, yeah. Anyways, here, let me quickly pull up why clashing with these is a bad idea generally. So, eliminate die vacuity, quick jabs. Pretending each of them has potential and stronger, which number one is a massive module expenditure. That's like 6 modules. And even then, it clashes like goddamn shit into the same light cost from enemies. Uh, Full Assault, it does not do much better. On just both of these, it's not great. And because these are very often things you're using to set up the statuses, like you're not getting the checks that you're putting on them if they're normal checks very often. An ongoing struggle just very often just doesn't come online fast enough. Any comment here? Like, it's pretty clear that like every single one of these cases, you're
No,
clashing into this is like
absolutely, I agree with you.
this is like
This
it's so
is
rough. Like again,
it's such a bad idea to try to clash with these things
yeah.
a lot of the time.
Like in experience, one of someone tried to clash one of these things into an enemy that will remain unnamed, and the guy got staggered 2 dice in and couldn't finish the thing. Like it's so rough. Like it just again just like this is showing really. I want to say is how much these are non-factoring clashing and why these are not a part of the clashing table. You see this asterisk over here? This asterisk is here because these should not be clashed with. These are very valuable. For example, I put quick jabs as a staple. It's just like because it's good. You want to put this in your build. Just don't make the mistake of trying to clash with it. It's here to like wail on a defensive enemy and get defenseless enemy and get a shit ton of value out of them. Don't try and clash with them unless you know exactly what you're doing. Anyways,
You as the player have priority. Don't mess it up.
you can choose
That's
not
basically
to.
the whole point.
You can choose not to do this. Anyways, this is again. Watch this. You see how many modules I have to put on this? I have to put an additional module onto this just to make it work. This somewhat is fine-ish if you squint at it a bit, because you lose the first clash and then you, on average, win this. You might also notice this is kind of a fake 3 cost because insight can get to like 2+, and this is a 1 cost, and you're trading 2 for 1. But we're just gonna ignore that. If you build a fake out like this, you can kind of clash, but only kind of. Again, like this is really sketchy. But like if you're in a spot where you need like something to like clash shittily into blocking hits, and also do infliction, you can use fake out. Again, this is like still really dodgy, but like you can make it work, right? Anyways, continuing. We good? Yeah. All right.
Yeah, I think we're good.
All right. Defensives. You're gonna notice these two are both staples. This is because how to put it. Just having a low cost defensive is really good, in my experience. Just having like a thing you throw out there when you're low on light to not die is a surprisingly common situation in lots of campaigns and encounters, and this just works. Mixed defense slightly lower because if there's a single large attack, I'd rather the first die shield more rather than spread this out. This just has slightly less cases, but again, notice how this is still catch case. These are still very useful in the clashing. Any note on this, Rose?
I will say it is very clear we forgot to add in the potential use cases for the ones that are block or evade to have absorption noted on them. I particularly want to note though panic defense. I am a strange one when it comes to panic defense because I prefer the very high risk, high reward nature of evades. And I think a panic defense evade, if you're actually like buffing into it properly, can be incredibly interesting, especially if you put any sort of check on it.
Oh, definitely. I'm just a risk averse son of a bitch, so I for panic defense, I usually just go block all the way. This is generally assuming they're both blocks. Everything's block here. All right. So this is generally the way that I build these things. Heavy guard, you build the exact same way as panic defense, which is why I'm not including panic defense because the modules that go on are the same, the use cases are the same. Because again, like if you're losing with a defensive dice, it's fine because you're still getting value out of it. So you use heavy guard in the exact same situations you would use quick guard, and you build it exactly the same. So just you can substitute. These are interchangeable. It just depends on your build and whether you need a 0 light or a 1 light. Mixed defense here, we're gonna see first like the different builds. This is a second die focus. I'm putting all these modules on the second dice. Notably, we're going to see that I'm putting ongoing struggle on these, despite being 1 cost. This is because if you're tilting your build towards defense, you're saying generally, I'm okay with this going like into a grindier thing where this stalls out for several rounds and I eventually win. And so I'm generally assuming if you're willing to commit into these heavily defensive skills, your character is built to last long enough that ongoing struggle will get its maximum value, which is why there's ongoing struggle here. Notably, this heavy guard, 12 plus 5 is very good. If you notice 1 into 2, this has higher on average. And if this was offensive, I might be saying something like, but that's not consistent. But because this is a block die and it gets value by reducing the damage and stagger by the amount you roll, even if it loses, I'm completely okay heavy guarding into amputation because I still get the reduction value over here. Same dynamic here with mixed defense. Again, I'm fine clashing this into Illuminate Thy Vacuity purely because, yes, the first one's going to lose. Yes, sinking kind of sucks. However, I'm reducing the damage, and I am sitting pretty. And the reason why it's a second die focus is because if I were to put all of these on the first dice, it doesn't catch as many cases that it wouldn't before. Whereas it's just like becomes a shittier heavy guard with a 1d8 tacked on at the end. However, with a second die focus, what you can do with this into predict something like predictive slash is your first die neutralizes, and then into the second dice you trade favorably. In general, so like if you put a first die focus here, this behaves like a heavy guard. And if you're going to do that, you might as well just have an actual heavy guard. But if you put a second die focus, this actually changes the clashing behavior. Any comment here, Rose?
I don't think I have anything.
Yeah, more or less
really
agree.
add.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, good. Now, block and hits. These things. Evade and hit is the primary absorption archetype that I'll get into later. For now, parry, delayed strike, counter combo, bastion, these all do basically the same thing. You're going to notice all of these are staples except for catch case. This is because block and hits kind of are godly at clashing. They clash well into very many things. Because you're neutralizing the first die and then you're hitting with the second dice, you're going to see that this just general pattern is very good. In addition, you're going to see this is delayed forcing and one-siding. This is good for one-siding because if you one-side with this, you hit them with the offensive and you save this dice. Exact same thing over here, and this is a very useful behavior to have. Any notes, really? Or we good to discuss the clash?
Not yet. I'll have some notes on parry a little bit later.
Definitely, okay.
Not the block version.
Alright, yeah, because we did split the parry version to block and to evade. Alright, now delayed strike. I build delayed strike with second die focus. This is because the shape of it. You notice how the second die is larger than the first die? That just means that it's easiest to emphasize the second die. And the usefulness over here is, if you clash it into, say, study break, right? The first die clash doesn't really matter, but the second die clash, because it's offensive into offensive, I want more certainty. And so I tend to put it all into this second dice, and then 7.5 into 6.5 is relatively rough, but 10.5 into 6.5 is a very good exchange rate. Again, we're talking about like the ongoing struggle versus normal check here. If I'm building this, I would put a normal check on here because there's this offensively focused defensive block and hit base. I'm assuming generally I can get my ailments off, which means this is going to be consistent. And again, ongoing struggle takes a while to get online. Bastion, first die focus. This is a really big block die. If you're noticing it's clashing to amputation, it doesn't need to, but at max ongoing struggle, it just kind of beats it. And it beats most large dice, which is incredibly good. And over here, again, we're going ongoing struggle because this is a more defensively tilted base. Because its natural shape, the first die is larger than the second die, and by a large margin at that. Which means I'm favoring this over here, and I'm going ongoing struggle because I want to play the long game. And that's just what's going through my head generally when I'm trying to spec these skills. And as another comment, both of these trade relatively well into Illuminate Thy Vacuity because the first one doesn't matter, second one beats, and this one generally beats. Comments, Rose, at all? No? Okay. So, and another note is like you're gonna notice how you can construct these with very little modules. This is not even close to a full module. These are just generally blueprints that are intended for you guys to build out with and fill out with whatever you want. These in particular, you can do this with all your innate models from starting and still have some left over, and that's very good. Anyways, that's about it for blocking hit clashing. Let's discuss walled off. It's named after walled off because walled off was the only base that had this pattern, and only recently was wait and see added. I consider walled off very, very good personally, but the reason why has to wait for the next slide because it has to do with specific clashing behaviors. Wait and see similarly is pretty decent, but you're gonna notice this has delayed forcing on this list, and then walled off has neutralization on this list. Yeah, and so to really start discussing like why this is classified this way, we're gonna go to the next slide because so for wait and see, I want to build this as a third die focus because again we're gonna see this evade block. This is 1d4, 1d4. We're gonna not pretend that these can really notably absorb anything to any meaningful degree. Instead, we're gonna focus on this big die and make it so that this can almost certainly beat anything. So one of these cases for a wait and see is illuminate die vacuity. In the case of you don't care about being inflicted with sinking because you have safeguard or you are okay with being sunk, but you really don't want this one to hit. And so you clash wait and see into illuminate, you lose the first two. You get sinking, you get some damage, and then you hit back with a 8.5 without the conditional and 11.5 with the conditional against a 3.5. Again, we're going to see, again, this is a normal check because this is an offensively tilted base. And if your character is like using generally offensively tilted bases, they can satisfy their conditionals more easily. Walled off, I build as a second die focus because again, if I put this as a first die focus, this behaves like a massive as a strong guard, which I don't. Let me check the name. Heavy guard, yeah. It behaves like a heavy guard, which is kind of rough. I'd rather have a second eye focus. That way, it answers things like study break really well. In fact, like walled off is one of the best answers to things like study break because you block the first one, neutralize. The second one you beat, and you hit one sided with the third one. And this is a really like unique clashing pattern that almost no other base can pull off. Because wait and see into study break, this is a 1d4. This is not winning. And again, we're going to look at these a few more clash cases. Slash, amputation to wait and see is kind of rough. It does most of its damage. You hit back, but it generally isn't too great. Walled off into amputation is actually pretty decent because you save a tiny bit more damage. 2.5 for 4.5 just plus 2, but that is pretty notable in lots of cases. And then you save a massive block die and you hit back. And so not only do you have a save block die, you hit back for slightly less than your hit for, but they're equal cost and you walk out with save dice, which is very relevant in lots of cases. Rose, any comment on these? I know that you have like specific use for walled off that you wanted to mention.
I think one interesting thing about like walled off and other like defense offense skills, especially walled off, is that trailing offense die at the very end, as you mentioned, is a very good one-sider, and for that reason, it's very good for like a status infliction build that wants to maintain their status while still being able to be more defensively oriented without having to boost up the power of specifically the block dice for clash win effects. There's also the use of like triggering statuses and such. Basically, any case where one-siding is useful, I think this kind of covers that because it puts like one little die at the very end that enables you to kind of one side.
No, that's very, very fair. From my perspective, again, I want to quickly point out these different clashing uses. This is delayed forcing because you can make this pretty large, whereas a 1d6 is much harder to boost up over here. You're not forcing anything with a 1d6 base at 2 cost, whereas a 1d8 plus 2 at 2 cost is actually somewhat okay at delayed forcing because it's like bigger on average and multiple like third dice. Another note here is like you're not neutralizing anything with this because this is just so little. you're better off just like treating these as things to peel away, like small dice at the start, or peel away defensive dice by neutralization, by like making them neutralize, especially like evade dice, like because evades into offenses are really rough. This peels off two evades, which is pretty good. And again, one siding over here is because if you one side with this, you get like this little cheeky 1d6 with 2 cost scaling on stats infliction, and you save a big block dice and a small block dice that you pretty much order however you want to answer a lot of skills. So that's another second like use case for walled off in this variant in particular. We good to move to the next one?
I think so. I
All
think
right, all
so.
right, yeah. Lingering guard. These guys. You're gonna know all of these are one siding. It's because clashing with these is really rough, simply because not a lot of enemies have very common like 3, 4 dice with very tough like later dice and smaller earlier dice. And so largely the use of these is you want to hit one-sided and save these, which is a similar use case as I discussed walled off, except it kind of forces it. I won't speak too much more on them because they're all basically used the same, and I rate them differently based on how good they are. For example, Ready for Anything is 2, 3 cost scaled offensive dice, which is good for stats infliction. Similarly, like defensive push has 2 cost scaling, which is pretty good, and like that 1d6 plus 3 is a pretty good value for the amount of light you're paying for this archetype. Again, like a really rough part when the minus is a catch case is if you see the sum of the expected values here is 11, whereas if you go all the way back to a single offensive dice, it's not much more than a strong strike, and this has just many more uses, which is why it's a staple. Anyways, so largely lots of these are based on values and just generally how they shake up. This is also a catch case because what's really rough here is that all these individually are not very good at winning things, which means we're basically forced to one side here. This is niche here for similar reasons as just being generally worse than defensive push on virtue of being an evade over here. Small evades are worse than small blocks because blocks are better when losing, as mentioned by Rose at the beginning. So this is here both as a function as like the different dice size and like just because it has less expected value, and also because this is an evade instead of a block, which is worse if it's saved, and you're basically forced to save it because this evade is at the end. Riposte has like similar issues with dice size, but because it's 1 cost instead of 2 cost, it can be somewhat excused because light cost efficiency means there's some cases when you're light and you'll take this over nothing. Press on is questionable purely because just saving a single one over 2 things is really rough, and the only thing you're really getting out of it is not a lot actually. You get like slightly larger offensive dice, but again, I'm not pretending that these things are going to be winning any clashes that are actually tough. And if you're clashing with this, there are going to be better options. Any comments on this?
My only comment is that I have never genuinely considered using any of these bases personally.
Yeah, that's very true. What these are really good at though is if there's a speed disadvantage, what you can do is like you can have like a shitty clash with like Ready for Anything with like a 0 cost, and then save these for like another speed die that goes into you.
Oh, that is actually a really good point.
These are good
I
for like
and while you
trading
were
light.
talking, sorry.
Sorry, my bad. Yeah, no, but these are like good just because like if you are willing to trade light for speed dice and safety, speed dice advantage and safety, this is great. These are just incredibly light and efficient, which is why I also personally don't use them a lot. Sorry, you continue now. Yeah.
I was going to mention that one nice little thing, though, is that you could theoretically put something like ongoing struggle on one of these and get like a pretty strong held evade or block, especially on ready for anything there.
Yeah, definitely. I will say for lots of these, I just do put a first side focus because I'm assuming I'm clashing this and like these are more consolation prizes. But definitely you can just shift this over to one of the blocks. but again, like we're looking at this like it's slightly rough. Like the use case I would have for this is ready for anything into like hands-on learning, right? For instance, and the first side nearly always wins. Any other offensive like this ties sometimes, and I'm saving these. And like yes, I'm going down to light, but I'm getting speed eye advantage because I'm saving these, and these can deal with a skill sometimes. Riposte, similar concept here. Riposte into single edge. I'm going neutral, and then I have the evade slash block saved over here. And yes, I'm going down one light, but I'm saving a die, which is very relevant. Any real comment here? Like this, I think is fairly straightforward.
I think that's pretty straightforward, yeah.
Yeah, like this is the use cases for it. All right, evade and hit. I think you know what, you should take this away. This is your domain here.
All right, evade and hit. This is really good because everything that you heard about walled off could kind of apply to a lot of these, especially because that evade can be reused, right? You look at something like parry there, right? I personally wouldn't have used it that well, but if you do get that check off, you have some pretty good value there, and you're clashing into something like Illuminate Thy Vacuity pretty well. And as long as you get like against that first die, you've already earned a ton of value because that evade will go into that second die. You'll probably reduce the stagger damage at minimum, and then that offensive die will go into the back one. But you could evade that entire skill all at once and then just hit back. That's one of the really big parts to evade dice for me.
God.
It's just that chance that you just completely ignore what the enemy was doing and completely ruin their game plan.
Also, like just speaking like on the numbers, if I may, like this
Yes.
just to reinforce the point, this is nuts. Like 8.5, if you get this check off into 4.5, this is like if you roll a nat 1, okay, this is still a 5, and there's a half and half chance. Actually, no, there's more than half chance that they do not beat this every single time. If you roll like a 3, which is not good, but that's still a 7, this thing, it needs to roll a 7 or 8 in order to beat, which means more than often than not, like parry into Illuminate, this thing's going to beat all of them if you have max power from Ongoing Struggle and hit back, and you just committed highway robbery because you like used a 1 cost to blank a 2 cost and hit back. Sorry, you continue.
Yeah, no problem. One thing I will also mention with something like Oldest Trick down there, you are trading at like a light deficit, but at that light deficit, you can potentially gain a bunch of extra value to make that worth it. Again, you have that really big evade dice at the front, and especially once you have that like power condition off, you can get some like massive plays because especially since it's a +4 with the power condition, I think that's a total of +6. That's how you have it written out,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, since that's a total of +6, if you roll at minimum a 2, the enemy will be tying you in any scenario. And if you roll a 3, which, you know, on a 1d10, that's
Very
gonna happen a
probable.
lot. You're gonna roll at least a 3,
Yeah.
right? The enemy will not be able to beat out your skill. They won't even be able
Even
to
if
tie
they
it,
like
so
max
you
roll
will
everything.
guaranteed gain the extra value. Yeah, even if they max rolled, if you rolled a 3 minimum, they would not be able to do anything to you because you would have had a 9, and it's kind of nutty. The bigger the gap with evade dice, the more value you actually earn.
Yeah.
And so trading down with evade dice, yes, you're losing out on light, but you gain so much in terms of like the immediate turn in like defense and potentially in punishing with offense because that offensive die on Oldest Trick is incredibly strong.
Yeah.
It's actually a good clasher in and of itself. So even if in the circumstance where you, and I'm going to mention this again later, even in the circumstance where you evade the first die and then tie the second die, that offensive die is still really good. And I think the same thing can be said of like clashing Oldest Trick into something like Predictive Slash or Study Break over here. Even though the defensive dice at the front kind of nullify it out, the evade at least, you still have that really strong offensive die to follow it up. So for basically trading at a light deficit, you gain this like very you gain this very useful skill that clashes against so many different things. And even with study break, you're not even at a deficit. You're equal with your opponent at that situation. And I'd say that that's still pretty worthwhile because of how much power you just get out of this one skill.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like, and I also will mention, evades when against defensives. If they win, they regenerate your stagger. So you can use this oldest trick against something like study break. If you get like um average values on both, you're regenerating 7 stagger, which might just help you not get staggered like next scene. If you get hit by something. Like, do not underestimate the fact that evades just innately regen stagger if they clash win against defensive dice, because that's a very relevant fact. Like,
This is true. This is true.
yeah. Anyways, like, I mean, this is like relatively short, but I feel like we got across like why evades are good. Like, they're good for very simple reasons, but those are very powerful reasons. Anyways, mixed spaces. All right, so let's talk about these mixed spaces. I'm not going to discuss these. The reason why is like you can consider them as behaving like bases we've already seen before, and the reason why they're rated the way they are is because of the bases like they behave like. Dodge and weave is a shitty version of walled off because it's really hard to do anything with this offensive over here. And if you want to focus on the evade, well, there's a much better thing to use over here. Like Otis Trick having a 1d8+1 base is pretty big, actually.
Absolutely, especially with the fact that you have to consider that dodge and weave costs the same as oldest
Yeah,
trick, and
and
yet
like the
gives you worse
biggest,
value in every
and
way.
the second die too. Like the second die, like it's 1d10+2. That can actually win things, unlike these. Like you can use this as a really weird walled off. It's just why wouldn't you just go either walled off or Otis Trick if you have a dodge and weave there? Like that's just in my experience. I have never found a use for this in
Like
my entire life. Like
if you're picking dodge and weave, you're going for flavor or you're doing some strange clash lose build, and clash lose is not something you can build around in the current system.
yeah, definitely. Anyways, so let's go here. Triple threat. This is just a lunge. It behaves like a lunge effectively. Except it's very good, like because like you have like 3 dice at 2 cost. Admittedly, is decent. It's just like it's behaves like a lunge most of the time, and lunge is niche because like it's really rough to find like ways to use it. So triple threat is the same. Any comment on this? Or, like,
Triple Threat has kind of like a nice little thing of that walled off bases kind of have though, where it has the third offense die at the very end. Um, but I mean, it's you'd rather take walled off,
no, walled off is
you
just
know.
better. Yeah, like it's
So,
because if they're like a large evade at the start, it can eat your offensive. Like walled off is just better.
but if you're between triple threat and lunge, triple threat has that one little thing that you might want to consider. That trailing offensive die is in a different, it's delayed. It's in a spot where you could potentially sneak through a lot of
Yeah, 100
skills
percent.
to do some nasty damage,
Yeah, it's just like
potentially.
why not walled off? You know, walled off just covers a lot of things. Yeah. Anyways, old reliable. It's a combination of delayed strike and lunge, and like this is like fine by itself, but just at this light value, like it just becomes a catch case because it's high light and this is not an evade. Honestly, like I don't think there's too much else to discuss with this one. It's just like you can find a use for it definitely. It's catch case like it's just you have to find a use for it, and it just behaves like a delayed strike with a block tag on the top, on the end. And I think we've discussed the delayed strikes uses, blocking its uses enough that you should be able to figure this out on your own. Same thing for lunch. Anything to add to
I
that?
think the I think the best case for old reliable might be clashing against a kind of delayed strike or lunge shape and then getting that block die saved. That's probably the only thing it really has going for it, and even then,
Yeah.
it's
It's all right. Like it's catch case, right? Like you can. I can see lots of uses for it. Just like it's not stable. You can't like shove this in a build and expect it to work like without too much
Yeah,
thought.
you really have to know when you want to use this thing
Yeah.
to throw it in there.
Utility, buddy. Let's talk about utility.
Utility. This skill is, I want to say that's kind of crazy. When it was introduced, I was like, I was excited for this thing.
Yeah.
Utility falls outside of the whole clashing structure. Well,
Kind
in
of.
baseline.
Yeah.
But, as Ham said, though, we are assuming that you are able to target with any skill. And utility has value in that whenever you choose to do nothing, you can choose to effectively do nothing better. Uh, One thing I will mention about utility, one of my first thoughts that I came up with when I was thinking about it is a one cost utility is rarely ever worth it. Because arguably for the same reasons that a one cost skill having on use and after use is less valuable, because you're spending an extra light to get barely any value out of it. Most cases in which you'd want to use utility, you're wanting to use it as a big burst, and that's how it should be used. 2 to 3 cost is like a minimum for utility. I think in addition, there's also the consideration of 2 cost is a gate for a lot of, uh, for some modules at least, that have certain on use and after use tags.
Yeah. Um.
Um,
Hmm.
Something else I want to mention is that it's going to be on a very build by build case for utility because not every build is going to want it. You're going to have a build that wants different kinds of buffs if you're going for utility, or you're wanting to throw in something that'll increase your consistency in like certain aspects, namely with charge and poise. Utility, it's not bad. It's not bad ever, but it's something that you have to really consider before you put it into your kit. You have to consider if that turn that you're spending, that hit that you're taking, potentially, is worth the buffs and the debuffs, or well, the buffs that you're going to gain from this. Um, can I think of anything else?
Um.
Oh,
Yeah.
aggro builds. Aggro builds actually don't mind using utility, even at like, sorry, let me backtrack. Before aggro builds, utility is also better later on whenever you have more speed dice. Because in the early game, only having one speed die, spending a turn doing nothing can be pretty rough. And even with the extra buffs and stuff that you gain, I would say the slight exception to this, now I'm transitioning back in, aggro builds. Aggro can still technically do something, even after they have no speed dice, because you are able to intercept for an ally using aggro, even if you don't have any held dice. So that can be a very good use case to a party, but obviously to yourself, you're, you know, taking damage and such. There's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of consideration that needs to be taken in whenever you're trying to use utility as a base, because you need to make sure that you have a game plan that you can follow after a turn where you've effectively done nothing.
I have something to add. There's actually like, we were discussing this. I did come up with one really weird clashing use. So let's just say your opponent, like your enemy, is using a walled off, and you're not too worried about taking that offensive hit. And because you targeted, you're mandatorily have to use a skill. And you really don't want to clash these block die because they have some kind of nasty effect on them. Using utility to blanket and just like not interact with these dice and just take the hit and then get more value from the on uses and after uses is 100% a thing you can do. You can like intercept for a friend with this. Um, Speaking of which, again, if like this is not an enemy video, but if an enemy uses like a walled off pattern skill against you, a very valid thing you can do is just take the hit and just ignore the block dice. And so that's like one like really weird edge case utility clashing thing that you can consider. But with that, like anything else we want to add before we finish up our discussion of all the skill bases?
I want to also add actually one
Sure.
more small thing. Utility as a base ego base. I know we haven't really discussed base ego
Hmm.
stuff here, but utility as a base ego base is very interesting because of the fact that you get that extra cost scaling. And so it can be really nice for that, especially if you're putting it in
Mm,
as a three
I see.
cost, because then you get 4 or 5 of most of the things, and 4 or 5 is a quite massive amount, especially if something like charge. Getting like 4 charge in one big burst is really helpful for consistency or for certain ego passives or any feats that might want you to hold on to charge. Anything that wants you to hold on to charge especially would really appreciate utility. I would talk a little bit more about a particular build that I made that I think is a little scuffed, but I think that's outside the purview of what we're
Yeah,
doing
it
here.
would like date the video, and we yeah. Let's move on. We good? Yeah. Okay. All right. So this is just a few of like the skill sets that I made just as an example of how I would build a skill set with this knowledge. For instance, we're gonna take Great Wall, which this is just a setup that has a bunch of defensive dice. So really, the skills I select from this point on are all about filling holes. First, I noticed my third dice is really weak, and also I don't have a lot of offensive power. So I put a third die focus wait and see over here, just as both an offensive component and as a third die focus skill to cover this hole. Next, I noticed I don't have very good first die offensive, which is very useful. So I put it in strong strike. And similarly, because I'm seeing my builds very defensively tilted and I don't have anything that's good to throw out as just a random poke at someone who can't like fight back non-committally, I put in a cheap blow. And finally, I'm looking at this. I have a second die focus on Great Wall. I have first die focus on Strong Strike. I have third die focus on Wait and See. And Cheap Blow is a good cover. What do I need? I'm noticing all my defenses are high cost, especially Great Wall, which is one of my major defensive ones, which means I now have to go for Heavy Guard to fill that hole. And see, like, as I quickly went through here, really when I'm thinking about like using these skill bases and like these building blocks to fill out a build, it's about filling holes in your kit so you're able to answer most things. Um, Another example is if I start out walled off, this is a second die focus. I want a first die focus because first and second die focus are huge things. So I would do this. And next, I don't have a really good answer to like 3 offensive dice with a really impactful third dice, which is a surprisingly common pattern in enemies. So I put an oldest trick on the list. And then finally, for a 0 cost, I need to figure something out. And I think with this setup, I'm pretty fine putting a panic defense, though honestly, that's interchangeable with cheap blow. Massive strike, this one. Massive strike is one of those where I really want 4 other skills, but this is really the third skill. I put a cheap blow again because like the top end is so offensive heavy. I feel compelled to make the 1 and 2 cost section have defense on die 1 and die 2, which means all of a sudden my low cost is deficient in offense, which is when I put in the cheap blow. And then wait and see is good because I need a third die focus thing, just in case something extra fucked up is pulled out. The reason I don't choose Otis Trick is because this is pretty top heavy with a massive strike, and I want to have a lower cost answer to these types of things. Defensive rush push. It's again a similar thing where I'm seeing this and yes, this I want a stronger first die focus because strong strike is just covers lots of things. Walled off is good in general as a base. Panic defense is good because it is covering my low cost defense, which is a bit lacking. And then old reliable as a base is good for third die focus. And that's just generally my builds here and the reasons why. Rose, you think I missed anything regarding these, or did I explain them pretty well?
No, I think you were pretty thorough. I think most people understand what you were
Yeah,
trying to get
exactly. Because like,
across.
again, I went through this pretty fast, but the most thing is like, again, what you want to focus on is light cost holes and also dice holes. For example, this is leaving a third dice hole because there's nothing there. And because lots of the defensive things are 3 cost and 2 cost, I'm leaving a light cost hole for my defensive focus, which is over here. Builds are generally, you want to just have as little holes in them as possible. We're gonna actually look at an enemy that's one of the tougher ones in the book, just to put this in perspective. This is Tomari. Mommy's best work we're not going to discuss purely because this gets into stats infliction and setup certain setups. Loss of love again, we're not going to get too into this. 3 strength is a lot, but it doesn't fundamentally change the way that you clash the skills. Anyways, we're gonna talk about this skill set. So most of like 2 of these skills, specifically Ruckus and Love, 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 are incredibly easy to clash. Ruckus is answered by basically anything that's strong. For example, a singular strike beats the first one and you take the 1d6 and you're ahead. Love, 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 similarly, just a single offensive dice, you clash win that, and then the block you just let stand there, and the counter blunt you let stand there. Yes, the guy gains save dice, but again, you clash win this and you just basically ignore the guy until he targets you. So these we're not going to address simply because there's like 1.5 million ways to do it, and they're generally easy to address. There's the reason why I selected Tomari is there are 3 skills on this list that are individually kind of rough to clash in different circumstances. So we have triangles, maybe squares, and where are you? And the skills that we're going to be using for this is Great Wall purely because it has a tough time against this specific enemy. And we're going to look at like where the holes are and how they're roughly patched. For instance, against
Um,
triangles,
sorry,
yeah,
I'm sorry, Ham. If I may also mention, I threw in a particular skill that I wanted to show off the strength of Old Reliable
yeah,
as a skill
100%.
base against these. So you could consider it as almost like if you were building a skill set around Old Reliable, or if you had Old Reliable in your skill set, you could see, um,
Yeah,
consider it like a sort of option, so
yeah.
to speak.
And again, this
Or
is
not
like
Old Reliable, sorry.
yes, oldest trick, right? Yeah,
Oldest trick,
yeah.
thank you.
Anyways, but like so again, we're going to demonstrate this enemy, which is one of the holes in this build, and even against one of the enemies that is strong against this build, it still holds its own. So starting with triangles, Great Wall, obviously, bunch of block dice against this. It's very good, and it saves a bunch of counter block dice. Specifically, what's really good here is if Great Wall was used beforehand, you use the counter block dice, and with a check, this just beats everything. Another roughly okay thing to do is wait and seeing. Yes, you get 4 bleed, but you hit back, you don't get the stagger on hit, and you do more damage to Tomari than Tomari will deal to you, because that's on average 11.5, and then this is going to deal 10 to you. And this is even, which is good. So even like against a rougher enemy, this skill set still holds up because it's able to trade even or ahead depending on context. Um, Here, take it away.
All right. So, if for oldest trick in this situation, oldest trick answers a lot of these skills in very interesting ways. But this is one situation where I really wanted to point out an interesting part about oldest trick. So, first things first, to think about evade dice. I have little charts over here that I think help to visualize how to think about evade dice. When it comes to evade dice, you want to think about like a lot of the possible outcomes and what happens in those outcomes. You don't have to think about every single outcome individually, but more just think about the whole of how often you're potentially winning, losing, tying. Um, there's also an interesting thing to note that tying, as you can see through the yellow bar, if you don't mind, like just kind of showing that off, the little yellow bar that's in the chart shows like all of the tying location or outcomes. And tying outcomes are actually quite rare compared to winning and losing. Um, I actually changed out the averages that Ham wrote in on these skills for percentages for how often you will actually win against these dice or evade against these dice. Anything highlighted in blue here shows a like the success chance for evasion, winning, in other words, and then anything highlighted in yellow shows a tie. So the interesting thing is that for oldest trick, I put ongoing struggle on here, and the skill at base has like a +2, and I accounted for this like situation on the left hand side, the stuff outside of the parentheses. You have a pretty decent chance of evading that first die, and then that second die, you only have to tie it. And due to the funny little quirk of how these charts kind of work out, or how like the chances work out, tying in this situation actually is equal to the previous die in terms of chance, even though it gains a +1 to the actual size. And the reason I say tying specifically here is that your chances are actually better winning against the skill if you tie on this die. But even if you don't, you still have a 55% chance on the next die. It is kind of nutty how just you are completely safe against the skill doing the evade die. As a matter of fact, I calculated it out, and your total chance to evade is like a 26% chance. That's 1 in 4. And then that's not counting the extra 5% or so chance that you get from the alternative path where you tie on the middle die. Roughly, I think both of these would add together and would just straight up come out to like a 30% chance to completely nullify this skill. And I think that that's pretty strong. Um, but of course, that is the thing with evade dice. It's always chance based. Now, at higher powers, you really don't want to tie on that die because you get that 87% chance on that third die. So, and you have a much larger chance of totally evading, which is 77. And I actually calculated it out. Your chance for that other outcome, where you have the offensive die at the end, that's an extra 3%. That's a roughly 80% chance to just completely nullify this skill once you have the ongoing struggle out. Um, I do want to mention one final thing. Um, the I added in poison charge mostly as a way to visually like show these status effects. They are really good chance effectors. Like they either fix your chance with poise to the maximum possible value, which in most case or like in all cases, if you look at these charts, the player at max value wins in every single case here. And that's because the die's power is generally higher. Um, and even at equal power, it would at minimum tie. Um, and then for something like charge, there's more specific scenarios where charge is helpful, but charge and rerolls are very powerful for evade dice, especially as you get to more of like the 70 to 80% range or like any sort of outcome like that, because it just the likelihood that you fail goes down pretty significantly on a reroll, and it's just good. I'd just say it's good to have these on any skill where you are primarily focusing on evasion as a way to avoid your opponent.
And, anyways, yeah, that's a really great point. Tomari, the next really like big skill that is troublesome is maybe squares. The reason why is this block dice over here means it's hard to like evade all the way through it. Yes, like but as mentioned, you can still do the exact same thing where like you just have a big enough offensive die at the end of the evade that it beats this blunt. As for this build, there's a few ways you can skin the cat here. Obviously the counter block just beats this whole thing. You can also use Great Wall against it, and you somewhat neutralize it with the actual block dice. Wait and see, similarly, it's not really that bad. You Clash loses the first one, you mitigate the stagger, and then your offensive die over here beats the third dice. And the second dice roll does not matter because it's block against block, and there's no Clash win effect over here. The very interesting thing you can do, however, is you use Strong Strike into this. And at first glance, that looks very bad, but actually considering it, you win against the first one. You do on average 12.5 or 15.5. I'm going to assume that you have some way of forcing your condition through, or its struggle status, or its struggle, which only requires you to be at half HP, or you have like a team to go through the safeguard. Whatever the case, even if it's 12.5, you're doing 12.5 damage slash 15.5 damage, and it's doing 5.5 damage to you. You're on even light cost, you are dealing substantially more damage than you are being dealt. And so even though you're letting the rest of the skill one-side you, it really isn't that bad. Um, anyways, Rose, please take it away.
All right. So I'm not going to go in as in depth on like specific percentages per se this time, mostly because I think I got the point across. You think of evades in your chances to win most often. You don't think of them in like any other kind of scenario. I feel personally. Against maybe squares here, it's actually very interesting because it starts with the offense die. You can still gain a lot of extra value from the evade at the front of oldest trick. Um, and then the block die, you only really need to tie, so that increases your odds against it to just kind of neutralize any effect that it could have. But even in the situation where you lose, you aren't losing that much either. I guess this is one situation where I should have had the chart, so that's my bad here. But you're not going to be losing very much against this block die, even in the situation where you do lose, because it cannot roll very high by default. And in fact, once you've maxed out the ongoing struggle power, you have actually reached a 100% chance to tie. There is one outcome in that whole probability space that results in a tie. Every other outcome is a win for you, meaning that it it doesn't matter, like it basically just the die doesn't even exist. It may as well not even be there. Um, and this is a situation where I think an evade die can clash into a skill that does have some defensive utility in it, because it at least starts with an offense die, so it can gain value over a block die. Especially with that really high chance that you get full after the full ongoing struggle. And then on top of that, that offensive die at the end, even though I didn't boost it at all, it still has really good odds against that blunt die. So in a skill like this, where it is a bunch of extra dice, it is very powerful. Oldest trick is just incredibly powerful against maybe squares here.
Oh no, it's just a busted base. Oh, sorry. All right. This is another one where this is a really tough thing to clash. Like, this is probably the worst one on this list for this for my setup specifically. You still great wallet and you're mostly fine. Again, or like you just do the thing where you get a counter block die and you block everything. Like, it's still fine. And again, this is not a thing designed to be spammed because there's a negative on use and the negative after use. You just weather it with Great Wall most of the time. Um, Rose, yeah, there we go.
Now, this is the funny little situation because I accounted for the passive, the loss of love. Um, it's worth noting that Where Are You can only be used after this passive would be active, and so it needs to be taken into consideration that all of these dice are effectively +3 on top of what they did. And I did account for this in the percentages that you can see there. But I also accounted for the fact that by the time Tommy is dead, you are likely to have already gotten at least pretty far into oldest trick, or like not oldest trick,
Ongoing struggle.
ongoing struggles, power boost, um, and it is quite crazy how even with this +3 power across the board, you still have higher than coin flip odds to evade this skill. And in the percentage there, or in the parentheses there, that is accounting for a situation in which you were able to nullify that +3 power gain, which could be accomplished through a number of different means. But in the situation where you were able to do that, this skill is completely just destroyed by an evade die. Um, in addition, the last die, and this is something that's very common for evade dice, the last offensive die in any chain only needs to be at least tied to like gain its value. And I didn't even consider any eventuality in which you have to use the offensive die here. But this offensive die clashes pretty nicely into a lot of these, assuming that you've nullified the power. Elsewise, it's not really worth considering because it just does not have enough power. Um, I think that's about all I can really say here, other than I will say there is one little interesting thing to note with the charts here that like you can kind of see how big of a difference it makes to have like more outcomes versus your opponent. Because, like, for example, if your evade die was even like one size lower, you would have like that entire bottom two row, the 15 and 16 for the player power. That just wouldn't exist. Your chances would be significantly lower. So having like a higher size than your opponent really increases the space in which you can actually win, as opposed to just like tying.
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty accurate.
So so evade dice really benefit from having like a high size as well as high power. They don't mind being a little bit more swingy.
I mean, I'd say that's pretty accurate. And I will say the reason I didn't mention the strength is because, again, with block dice, it doesn't matter if you win or lose. You're just mitigating damage, and that it does very well. Yeah,
Yeah, obviously for the evade dice, I had to account for that power. Elsewise, it would have been dishonest to
exactly. Yeah.
show you the things otherwise, and that's why the parentheses is showing if you were able to nullify that power.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Obviously, you can't use the power null module though, because you yourself would be out of your power.
Yeah, I think that's roughly the end. We covered a lot. It was a long video. Thanks for sticking with us if you made it to the end. I hope this was useful. If you have any like questions, feel free to ask in the comments, or if you're on the SOTC Discord, like you can ask us in SOTC general. We generally are around there, or just make your interest known in the comments. And if I'm free personally, I would be all right answering a few questions. In general, I just hope this helps everyone choose their skill bases and figure out what to do with their characters, because I know that it can be very overwhelming sometimes. Yeah. And anything to
I
add?
would like to. Yes, I do have something I would like to add. I would like to say one, thank you very much, Ham, for having me here and letting me incorporate like my own little perspective and my own little idea to this presentation. I know it may not have meshed as nicely in with how Han presented things, but I think that was kind of the idea, having a different perspective, and I really appreciate that you value my perspective enough like that,
Of course, it's like a
genuinely.
great perspective.
Um, I would like to also say if anyone ever wants to message me about any sort of situation like this, I am always open to it. A ping on the Discord server for me is perfectly fine. Um, and I would be willing to answer any questions, especially since I think of builds in a more top-down structure, where Ham thinks of it as a very bottom-up structure. Um, so I tend to also be a little more okay with a little bit of a gimmick. But yeah.
Honestly, like I'm fine with
Um,
most things. I specialize more in just refining builds and giving advice on, oh, maybe if you shift this a little bit and you like, and take this module, or like you just change this a little bit and make things function better. I'd say I'm very good at tuning builds, and also if like this kind of commentaries and analysis on the system is helpful, y'all want to see more of it, there's a lot more to discuss here. This is just discussing the very basics of it, which is like skill basis, like the first thing. There's a lot more to talk about in regards to light economy, clashing, enemy design, like kit design, module distribution, statuses. Like there's so much more to discuss. Yeah, and
a lot of it is very much going to be outside of what I'm capable of really discussing because I think of things in a, like I said, more top-down sort of
yeah,
way. Um, I definitely like to think of more of a general game plan or a fun idea or something to play around.
yeah,
And that is something that is valuable to also think of.
yeah.
So hey, maybe we could make a video about that
Maybe
sometime.
sure. Yeah. Anyways, yeah. Thanks
uh,
for watching the end. I think we're just gonna call it here. Yeah. All right.